to Digitally Creative. I'm your host, Vincent Ferrari, and joining me this week, I have the master of CNC. It's even in his name. I have the one and only Cory Stanley. What's going on, Cory? How you doing?
Hey, Vincent. Thanks for having me on.
I've been so tempted, because I've talked to people about who I'm having on. It's like Odyssey Stan. I'm like, no, it's Odyssey CNC now. Stop calling him Odyssey Stan. When you changed your name, it just threw chaos into my world.
Yeah, I think I threw chaos into that from the beginning because I had it as Odyssey CNC, and I'm like, man, I don't really want people to think I'm just like this, like CNC manufacturer, like this company,
Mhm.
because I was doing woodworking, and then I'm like, man, it doesn't seem very approachable, and I use Instagram as basically just socializing, so it wasn't
Sure.
like I'm getting customers from it, and I'm like, well, I'm just gonna make it Odyssey Stan because Odyssey Corey sounded worse. And then I went with that for like I don't know if it was a year or longer, and then I switched back, and people were still like, "Yeah, it's Odyssey underscore Stan," and I'm like, "Well, not anymore." So it's fun to do
It
that to people.
so for those of you that don't know, well, you know what? I'll let you introduce yourself. That's much more polite. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the maker community and how people have come to know you and what you're known for.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I've been a part of the maker community for maybe 4 years now, like at least on like Instagram and stuff like that. Before that, um, so I did manual machining in the Navy, and I did that for 7 years. I got out and did like CNC machining. Sorry, I'm losing my words here. So CNC machining in a machine shop in my hometown, which is where I'm at, Springfield, Missouri.
Hmm.
I did that for 3 years, and then I took, once I started doing that, I'm like, also at the same time doing hobby woodworking in my garage while I was working, and I'm like, man, I want to apply this CNC stuff to the woodworking, and got into the just I got a 4x8. It was called a Griffin CNC machine. So I got that thing and started just doing, whatever tables and signs and all that stuff. And eventually that spiraled, and I ended up getting a bigger machine. And I don't know. I guess I make all kinds of stuff now, mostly woodwork. But then now lately, I've been getting into CNC manufacturing with these CNC rotary machines that we're doing now.
So as we record this, it is November 16th of 2022. And this prior weekend, you actually launched essentially the beta sale, I guess you could call it, of
Mhm.
the Cyclone machines.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I feel like I've been watching this process little by little as you've developed the machine and as you talk about it on your own podcast with Chris.
Mhm.
For those of you that don't know, he co-hosts the Makeshift podcast with Chris Powell.
Yep.
And it's kind of crazy watching this go from conceptual, not so much conceptual. I don't think I was in that early. I'm not going to pretend I'm
Mhm.
like a hipster and I knew it before everybody else, but just watching it go like from early stages to a tangible, first product. And
Mhm.
you're not at the commercial launch phase yet, but you are at the let's put these in the hands of people and let them beat them up phase, that's a major milestone. So first of all, congratulations on that. What's the reaction been like? Are you happy with it, or is
Well,
it?
thank you first for that. Yeah, it is just a wild journey so far. Not one that I would have seen coming a couple months ago. It's just how
Mhm.
quickly it came about. But yeah, I am very excited about how quickly it's moving. I feel like we are getting a ton of support from the community. And, like I was saying a few months ago, if I would have thought about a maker trying to dive into manufacturing CNC machines on their own and scaling it, I'd be like, nah, that's not possible. You know what I mean? Like you
Mhm.
already have to be an established company or like something big like that to be able to afford to do this, or but it's just the way it came about was almost perfectly fitting for us. And I say us, that's so I've been kind of by myself for, a couple of years now on the woodworking journey. And I've had a buddy of mine though, Brian, that I'd kind of go to for like plastic or CNC bits. And he worked at this big, like a limo company, but he also tinkered in his own shop and made CNC machines, like little, just small ones. But I saw he was selling a machine probably 6 months ago now. And I went to him and I was like, hey, man, do you think we could convert this to a dedicated rotary? Because I've seen them, but they're not, they're not really widely available. Or I haven't found a company that's just making dedicated, standalone, just rotary CNCs.
Hmm.
And he's like, oh, that'd be cool. So we put our heads together and figured out how to build this thing. And it was an open builds machine. So just aluminum extrusions. And so basically, we chopped it all up and reconfigured it to be sturdy, and got the rotary attachment for it. So it's a 3-axis machine, not four. A lot of people call just a rotary a fourth axis, which it is when you add it to a 3-axis machine.
Hmm.
But we swapped the y-axis for the rotary, and so the gantry is fixed, and then your X moves left and right on the center line of the part that spins, and then your Z still goes, up and down. So we got this thing, and we're like, well, I don't know what I'm going to make on it, but I've just always wanted to get into, rotary, and then eventually like fifth axis stuff. Like that's just where my head's at. I want to keep trying to learn the next CNC thing I can learn, and so we got this thing out, started making things. Started with just hammer handles because that seemed like something people would love to see, and it was like faster and sturdier than we thought it was going to be. And we're
Hmm.
like, man, I think, and a lot of people loved it. Like a lot of people were like, man, I'd love to have one of those. Can you like put a kit together? And
Oh
I was like,
boy.
maybe. And I
Oh
started thinking
boy.
about that, but there is already a guy out there that puts together kits, and you can
Hmm.
buy his plan. You can buy all the extrusions, you can buy all the stuff, and you can assemble it. He has plans. So if you want to do that, you can. But what we did was we used the CNC machine I have, which is a Phantom CNC, and we cut all these gantry plates and all kinds of brackets on the Phantom out of aluminum, and just reconfigured this thing to be stronger and faster. Updated the controller and got a bunch of different other things, and now I just think it's too awesome not to try to run with it. Like,
I love the idea that you're selling it as a complete machine. I don't think because my first CNC was an Inventables X Carve, and I never finished putting it together. And I know that there are a lot of people who will argue up, down, left, and right that one of the best parts of getting a kit is that you know how the machine works and you know how it's put together. I was like, no,
mm,
no, not for me. I don't want my expertise putting a machine. I don't mind fixing a machine. I'll take anything apart and try to fix it. But I want it assembled by an expert, or at least a majority of it assembled by
right.
an expert. Like even the best CNCs now on the consumer level, at least, you don't get them fully assembled. You get them in, knockdown parts and kind of put it together,
Mhm,
kind of like IKEA furniture, but with fewer steps.
right.
And but like the X carve was just too much. It was like, wait, connect this and put the board in here, and it's like, seriously, like I don't have time for this. And I was
Mhm,
the episode prior to this one, I spoke to Kevin Barnett from Carbide 3D,
mm,
and that was something I liked about the Shape Oko was that even though it came in a couple of boxes, it was largely together when I got it. It took me a couple hours to put it together. It was no big deal to put it together. The idea that you're taking this machine that might be someone's first foray into rotary and kind of selling them a machine, not a like I used to call it the cocaine bags of parts, just a bunch of
right.
cocaine bags,
Yeah.
and it's kind of wild. Like you really just said, we're going to give you the right experience with this machine.
Yeah, and that's our whole plan going forward to this, because I think there is a misconception to rotary milling that it's too hard. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Or like it's too difficult. And I think I would say like 90% of people that bought their first CNC machine and they got it with the rotary, they probably don't use it. Like
Right.
and I've been on a bunch of CNC pages and rotary pages, and a lot of people are like, I have no idea where to start with this. I don't know how to add it to the machine. I don't know how to start working with it. It's just too much for me to tackle at this point. So I'm going to stick to what I know. And our plan here is like, you know, 10 years ago, CNC machines in your shop were not that common. And
Hmm.
you and Al just talked about that on episode 2. I just listened to that one about how, you know, how quickly it's grown. How now it's a tool you can use for basically anything in your shop, and it's widely accepted. And that's kind of our plan with the rotary, is that like we just want to give CNC and digitally creative people the next step
Right.
um, in CNC manufacturing, is that we want to not only give you the machine that you can put on your bench top that you can just get to work with. We also want to give you like the training and education, and show you that it's very approachable. Like my first rotary was, a couple months ago when we got this thing put together, and then I had no idea where to start. And once I got into it, I probably within 2 weeks I was like, oh yeah, this is easy.
I'm amazed because I mean, I as far as the hardware goes, I just don't have any frame of reference for A, how it works, and B, what you would have to do. But when it comes to software, when I started to finally understand after listening to you and Chris, you guys did an episode early in the run of Makeshift where you spent like an hour talking in detail about these machines. And
Yeah.
that was the episode that you both joked that you were losing everybody. And Jeff, a weird guy, and I were both like, that was one of the most interesting things I've ever heard. Like, I understand what's going on now. But my immediate thought when you started talking about this was, what software would you use for this? Because I imagine, even, something like VCarve or Aspire, they're not really designed out of the box to do anything but carve into a flat piece of material. And I'm imagining all these like hurdles for generating proper G code, and how do you design for this, and how have you managed to overcome all that stuff? Because I'm pretty sure the hardware stuff, I have no doubt in my mind that if I was going to just say build me a piece of hardware, you and your team could just go, yes, here's the piece of hardware. But how
Mm.
did you overcome the hurdles of interfacing with the hardware and making it do what you wanted to do?
Yeah, yeah, and that was the hardest part for me. Fortunately, Brian, my right hand guy in this, is very attuned to that. Like he's just always been hardwired that way, that he can get in and figure out how to make the G code and the motors and the software, everything just merge together, right?
That's great.
And so I've been learning that from him, which makes it awesome to learn from somebody in your shop that you're like, wait, you can ask any question and get the answer. Um, so with that, like I'm using Aspire because he happened to have a license with it anyway, because the shop he had been working in, he's like, we got another seat, you can just toy around with this. I'm like, oh sweet. So I got
Jesus.
into Aspire, yeah, and
Just like that's a nice seat to sit in.
yeah, I know exactly. It's warm and cozy, and saves me money. So I get in there and I'm playing around, and I would have thought it was way more complicated than it is, but really it's um, and I could do it with a piece of paper in here, but I don't know how many people are gonna watch this. But if you took a piece of paper and you
Mhm,
rolled it up into a tube,
mhm.
right? Let's say you drew your drawing on the paper when it's flat, and then you roll this tube up into a cylinder. That's all you're doing, right?
Okay.
You're putting all your vectors on a piece of paper and telling it where the boundaries are of your job. And then when you get in and you start doing 3D, it's just if you were basically extruding things on your paper up and out, and
Okay.
then still wrapping that around.
And
So
then knowing that at some point that whole flat thing is gonna be wrapped around a diameter, a circumference of
Mhm.
something,
Yes.
of a certain size. Okay, got it.
When you think about it that way, it's super simple because you're like, okay, and Aspire makes it easy that you can go 2D, 3D back and forth, and you can have them on the same screen. So anything you do on the 2D shows up on the 3D, and you're like, oh, that's exactly how I want it. Um,
Okay.
but
So
once
this
once you
kinda
get,
sounds like the sheet metal environment in Fusion, where you can
yeah,
kinda start with a cylinder and then run a cut down the middle and flatten it. Now you're working on a flat pattern, and then this, I guess, in the post processor, it just puts that back together in whatever shape you're putting. Okay. Now I'm
right.
starting to understand how you would design for it. Wow, that's
So I think in
okay.
the software, all it's really doing is taking all those points on the coordinate system and
Mhm.
timesing them by pi, essentially. You know what I mean? Like it's just wrapping it around whatever
That's
your z
wild.
height. Yeah, yeah. So it seems very confusing, but when you start playing around with it, you're like, oh, this makes total sense, and it is so much easier than I would have thought it would have been.
It sounds in theory, when you're just thinking about it initially, it sounds impossible,
Mhm.
honestly. It
Right.
like, how do you design on a rod essentially? And it's like, no, you're not. You're kind of just designing on the flat thing that's going to get wrapped around that rod.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
See,
Yeah.
lots of light bulbs. This is the kind of stuff that it's been really interesting to listen to you guys talk about it, because
Mm.
you're doing your machines and then Chris is doing God knows what with whatever he's building in his shop. As usual, Chris is building something wild and crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is probably the next step for most people that have CNCs, is to get into rotary. It's like, it seems like the next logical progression in
Right.
what's going to be in your shop that's going to give, because everyone's always looking for that edge. That's why you buy these machines to begin with.
Yeah, I actually saw a post the other day on one of the. It's like CNC entrepreneurs page on Facebook, and the guy was going on about how he went to a craft show, and everybody at the craft show had the same Etsy items. Everybody
Yeah,
that had a CNC booth or whatever had the same flags and just whatever it is that everybody's doing between CNCs and lasers, and it's how it's a race to the bottom. How everybody's like, this will sell. I need to just make this and make them in bulk, and then make my price lower than the next guy. And so
yeah,
everybody's bringing the value down by trying to compete with each other. Which there's nothing wrong with that, but you also need to push yourself, I think, to doing something more creative that the other guy's not going to think of.
sure,
And that's where I feel like this as a tool is very underutilized, is that there's so many things out there that can be made on it that aren't really like a niche market yet. You know what I mean? Like the custom hammer handles. Like how many makers use a hammer in their shop every day, or a mallet?
sure,
And you
yeah,
could put your brand on that, and you can have everybody wants a branding iron to put the brand on what they're making, but you're also making videos in your shop every day. So why not have the hammer in your handle that has your logo on it? Just another thing for people to see, like, wow, this is cool. But there's so many little tiny markets that I don't think people are aware of. Like there's a huge market for pool cues, and I wouldn't have thought about that. But custom
hmm,
pool cues is a very huge market that luckily we found a guy here locally that took us on a tour of his shop, and he has the coolest shop. But he's a very good woodworker, and he's combining his CNC skills to make awesome pool cues, awesome inlays, and just they're beautiful. Um, but there's that market, and that's a huge market. Um, and I have a whole list of things because eventually I'm going to do 10 to 20 things you can make on your rotary CNC that can make you money. And I also want to have models available for people that when they buy this machine, they can get a couple models that they can change, maybe the logos and stuff that are on it, but it'll be the
hmm,
same, like just kind of base model of like a hammer handle or a mallet handle that they can get to work immediately. You know what I
sure,
mean? If they need to learn the software and that's going to take them a while, like I understand that, and we're going to help them with videos, but I want them to get the machine, be able to put a block of wood in it, and get to work as soon as they get it. That way they can start paying it off. You know what I mean?
sure. And that's, for people that are more adventurous, that'll give them something to reverse engineer, to understand how to
Mhm.
start forming their own designs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that, with 3D printing, it's most obvious when people get a 3D printer and they're so excited, and I can make anything, and they start just going to Thingiverse, and
Hmm.
it's like they just grab whatever they can. They print like 45,000 tchotchkes, and they never really see the utility of it because they don't understand the modeling side of it.
Hmm.
And I think something like a rotary CNC, which you really can't just go to Thingiverse and get stuff for. I think it's going to be super helpful to say, this is how the file is designed. This is
Hmm.
the file. You can cut
Hmm.
this if you want, but then you can actually rip it apart. Look at the model and go, oh, okay,
Yep.
yeah. I'm really impressed with how complete your mindset is for this. I know you've kind of set out with the idea of making it a business, so the whole thing kind of came together the right
Hmm.
way. It came together as a product for an end user, not just something cool that you could use in your shop.
Right.
Is this something you always wanted to do, like developing a product, that kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I think that's where my head's been geared because I'll get to a point where like I'll come up with a new product that I think is just like the coolest thing that I haven't seen anybody else make, and then I'll
Mm,
make it, and I'm like, meh, move on to the next thing. So it's like I want to have a product that I can keep making, but I
mhm,
also get so bored of the monotony
Mhm.
And this is where I think it's different for me because it will be monotonous to make
Right.
these parts or to have them all these parts made and assembled. But I'm going to have a team to help me do that. But also, it's new challenges every day. Like we're going to get this machine figured out, but we have 3 other prototypes in our minds already of the next machine. And so I think we're
Wow.
going to grow this to be where we have multiple different machines. Like just right now, we're trying to figure out a true 4-axis rotary machine. So, like with your CNC machine, a 3-axis machine, if you put the rotary on there, you have 4-axis, which most people keep their tool on center line anyway. Most of the tool
Mhm.
paths just do that. They
Right.
just lock, one of your axes in place and just spin it like a rotary. But if you have something complicated like let's say it's just a statue and
Mhm.
you've got legs and a void between them and the arms are out, like you can't do that with the rotary because of the way the tool won't fit in all the pockets,
Right.
because it's spinning and the tool's going to be in the way. So you need that 4th axis to be able to like
Kind of
offset, make a
move
pocket.
come in, move in a little bit. It's
Hmm.
it's interesting you say that because last week I talked to Kevin Barnett from Carbide 3D, and it was the
Hmm.
same. He was saying the same thing. He said, as you get to use a CNC more, as you start using this equipment more, one of the things that happens, even subconsciously, is that you start to actually think like the machine. You start to
Hmm.
look at something and go, this machine's just not going to be able to do that because it can't move that way. So how do I hold it? How do I cut into it? How do I move it so that I can get this to do what I want? And you've seen some people doing some crazy things with the Shape Oko, and what usually it involves like an extra axis or cutting a hole in the base or something like that, and it's like, oh, and the reason that's happening is because people are understanding, they're understanding why the machine isn't doing what they want, and they're trying to make it do what they want it to do because they've hit that understanding point.
Mm,
So it's kind of
right.
a cool it's kind of cool that you guys back to back said basically the same thing,
Oh
not
yeah.
having heard each other, which is it's great. I
Oh
love that
nice.
that's the mind you have the same mindset because I think it's the right way to look at it.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think like the CNC machine, I mean how you put it just then is it becomes an extension of yourself. And
Hmm.
it's like Al said in his, it's like he struggled with making was it dovetail joints or
Yeah.
something that by hand that he was able to do repeatedly.
Hmm.
And the CNC makes up for that in a way that it gives you the skills to do it. There's people out there that make beautiful handcrafted things and they have my admiration and respect for being able to do that. I can't. My hands are shaky. I don't have that much control over like precise movements like that. And I think it's amazing what they're doing. But for me, the CNC helps me get to that level, or it helps me do things more precise than I can do and
Yeah.
repeatedly.
That I think repeatability, because that's the one thing I always struggle with. Like even when I try to make I think the only thing I'm able to do repeatably is coasters. Like it's literally the
Mm,
only thing. Like if somebody says, build me the same cutting board 4 times, I don't even
mm.
think I can do that at this point. Like, because there's always going to be variation, right? There's always
Right.
a handmade factor to it. There's always going to
Yep.
be, and I think that's where the digital fab stuff just really, really ups your game a little bit. It's not so much that you can make one thing great, because you can make one thing by hand great. It's that if
Hmm.
you need to make a bunch of something, I do these little walnut things that you put on your thumb and you use it to hold a book open.
Hmm. Oh yeah,
They
I've
are
seen those.
super duper common, right? I didn't invent them. I just made a different design and I made it out of walnut.
Mm.
And I was hand making them for a long time with a Forstner bit and a bandsaw. And I ended up
Mm.
realizing, like, oh my God, the CNC is so much better for this. And
Oh
then
yeah.
on the flip side, when I do cutting boards, it's like I could do a juice groove by hand or I could do a juice groove on the CNC. And doing juice grooves by hand is like 50 times faster.
Oh
So it's
yeah.
like you have the best of both worlds there. It's like, oh no, if I need to make something a lot, it's going over there. Like I'm gonna let the CNC do the work, and then I'm gonna just sit there and watch it because
Oh
that's what
right.
we all do.
Exactly, that is what we all do. Like you always say, "Hey, well, this thing in my shop, it's gonna be running, and I'm gonna be doing other stuff." And then like I've been doing this for years, and I'm still like just watching it.
I can imagine
It's
like
awesome.
what. So the lightsaber hilt that you did was awesome.
Oh,
You
thanks.
know, the one that you cast and then stuck on the machine to make everyone think that you machined it.
Right.
I was so impressed by that. I was like, "This thing is awesome." I can only imagine, like, is that the I don't know what you've done to test the machines, but is that the most complex thing you've tested with? And ho like, as far I know, it was aluminum, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
was that the most complex thing you tested with, and how did it feel to see it finished?
So yeah, it totally was the most complicated, and probably hardest thing that we've done on there, as far as like pushing the machine to
Mhm,
see what its precision would be. You know what I mean?
right,
Because aluminum is going to show all your tool marks, any kind of play that's in that spindle, anything at all, it's going to show. And
right.
so when it came out, as smooth as it did, we're like, man, we're onto something. Like this, it took longer than $100,000 CNC machine would take, but you don't have to spend that much money to be able to
Right.
make aluminum lightsabers in your shop. And Brian, when he took it off there, he's like, I'm gonna keep this. He's like, I don't care what you say, I'm keeping this. As the coolest thing that I've ever made ever, and you can't take it away. And I was like, dude, we'll just run another one. Like, then we
Exactly,
can
we
both
could do
keep it.
that now.
Yeah. And
It's almost like
so
it's almost like you've unlocked a superpower now. Like,
it feels like
you
it.
can make the craziest things.
Mhm.
There's no limit, right? Because now you have that covered. I can only imagine what the next phase is gonna be like. Like you were saying, a statue where you can carve out individual legs and have them
Mhm.
twirl around the axis that you're
Yeah.
carving on. It's like, wow, I mean, where are we? It's 2022. It feels like we've hit the future. I get
Oh,
so
right. It does
excited
feel
by
like
this
it.
stuff, you know?
Oh, me too. Yeah, yeah. We're nerds in this way that like this is what I geek out about, and it's so funny because like a few years ago, like I was at like a Thanksgiving dinner, and it was at my in laws' house, and one of the guys that came to the party was like a newer family member, right? Like a new spouse, and so
Mhm,
we're just getting to meet each other and talk and all that. And this is when I was just machining, at CNC machining at a stainless fabrication shop and he's like, "So what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm a machinist, you know." And he's like, "I don't know what that is." And I'm like, "Oh, well, like I take things and like a lathe or a mill, and I like it spins it really fast, cuts metal off of it, and shapes it into a part essentially."
mhm.
And he's like, kind of like looked puzzled, and was like, And you enjoy doing this?" And he didn't mean it to be that way. Like he wasn't meaning for it to be rude, but to me, I was
Right.
like, man, some people have no idea about like how rewarding it is to like just make something. And
Sure.
at the time, it wasn't even like I was making a lightsaber that is cool to people. It was like I was making these components that went on a pharmaceutical tank.
Mhm.
And to me, it was the coolest thing ever. It's like, yeah, I love making this stuff. Like it's awesome. Like I get to
Sure.
just spin things down at a high speed into something cool. Um, but yeah, it's these are the things that we geek out about.
Yep. I have a friend who's working on a probe going to Venus
Oh
to
wow!
do a sample of the atmosphere on Venus.
At least
So
it's not a
it's
probe going to Uranus, right?
No,
There's there's a
that
joke
would be a
there.
very different probe for sure. Um, Probably not as high tech either. They're sending this probe to Venus. It's literally going to go into the atmosphere. It's going to pull a whole bunch of data, send it back to Earth, and then the atmosphere is essentially going to just destroy it. Like
Oh
that's
wow!
just they expect it to be fully destroyed by the corrosive gases in the atmosphere.
That's
So he
wild.
has been working for like over a year on one of the controller boards, just
Mm,
designing the controller boards, and he is having the best time. Like,
nice.
and it's such a job where you go, I can't imagine that being fun. And yet this is like his crowning achievement. He's so excited that he's getting this done, and it's kind of wild to think about. Like, somebody has to design the body, somebody has to design the flight controller, somebody has
Mhm.
to program the flight controller so that the damn thing actually reaches where it's supposed to go. And that's what he's geeking out about. So it would almost be the same kind of conversation. Like, wait, so you've been soldering a circuit board over and over again for a year? Like, that sounds horrible. Like, yeah, but it's going to Venus. Do you understand? It's going to Venus, man.
Yeah, yeah,
Venus.
that's
You ever been to
that's awesome.
Venus? It's far.
That's so cool. I couldn't imagine being a part of something like on that scale, like of how big. I mean, I guess I kind of was with like the CNC shop that I was in on they're making a big pharmaceutical tank, but that was
Hmm.
going, across the country to make medicine or something, which is
Sure, sure.
still cool when you think about it, being that big of a team. But to be building something going to another planet, and it's going to get destroyed, but it's still like your passion's there. Like I think that's the coolest thing ever.
So one of the things that we do as makers is we get really, really passionate about something. We are naturally passionate people. Like that's what starts you as a maker. You're passionate about a thing, but then what ends up always happening is you run it into the ground to the point where you don't want to do it anymore. It's like
Oh
I
yeah,
don't want.
definitely.
It's really hard to find that balance too, where you're like, oh my god, I'm doing what I love, and then at some point, it happens to everybody. It's like
Hmm.
I really don't love doing this anymore. Like this is
Right.
becoming way too much more like work than I want it to be.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that for me is always the monotonous thing, like we were talking about earlier, is that like once you get into a product and you're just making it over and over, that's where
Hmm.
I'm like I suffer with that.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see where this goes when my like passion is enough, I think, to overcome that. It'll still be, I think, where it'll get to a point where I'm like, but like I said, we'll have challenges to overcome that'll still be, and it'll be exciting to be seeing people like, I think it'll be so cool when people are making stuff in their own shop and they make something new that I hadn't thought about on this machine. I'm going to geek out, right? I think
Sure.
that's what's going to keep me going. I think is being like, what? I never would have thought of that. But you give the tool to somebody and they run with it. And it's going to be like the coolest thing ever, I think.
Yeah, I think once a Cyclone ends up in the hands of your Dennis Van Hoof or your Winston Moy, it's going to be
Hmm.
like, I didn't even think of doing that with it. That's wild.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, you
Yeah.
know what? Guess what? It does that now. Promo material. Hey guys, look what this guy did. I think
Right.
that's also going to be cool. Like, you're going to start getting the feedback on socials too with people using the machine. You're in line for a string of really, really exciting things coming. I'm so excited for you. I can only imagine like the feeling of getting these machines in the hand of people after kind of
Hmm.
working on them for as long as you have must be just the most wild thing in the world. Like, oh wow, they're going out the door. Like these aren't just
Yeah.
the ones that we're prototyping and testing anymore. These are going into the hands of people who are either going to love it or beat the hell out of it, and they're going to. But I do like the way you're launching it. I think it's really smart. A couple of machines at a discounted price with the understanding that if you buy this machine, we expect feedback. We expect, you're going to be the guinea pig.
Mhm.
You're going to need to beat this machine up. We're going to need feedback from you. We're going to need all kinds of testing to be done. We're going to send you firmware updates on the
Mhm.
regular. All this stuff. I like that you're doing this and I like that you're making it enticing for people to come in line. That's a really cool business model. I've not seen anyone do that. Usually, the only time you see that kind of discount is something like a Kickstarter, but that's
Mhm.
usually a finished product and you're just getting it for being early. But I like the way you're basically selling the machines to your beta testers and rewarding them with a nice discount for doing it. That's a cool business model.
Well, I hope so. Thank you. So we ran through like a bunch of different just ways to do this, and
Hmm.
maybe we're thinking outside the box more than other companies because they're used to a formula that they know works, and
Sure.
we don't know what works. So we might be kicking ourselves down the road of maybe this wasn't the best way to do it. But there's other way like I could get a massive loan, right, and start going
Hmm.
into full production and then selling things and then have issues, you know what I mean? So I think it for us it's the smartest move to do 5 machines, figure out if there's anything wrong with them we need to fix, and get all that feedback like you're talking about. Like it makes sense to us, so
And
hopefully it pays off.
also to an extent, I mean, this is not to bring down the product. It
Hmm.
is essentially a niche product.
Hmm.
And there's not a lot, you can't just go to a market research firm and say, how many people would want a $3,700, rotary CNC? Like they won't have that data and they'll have no
Oh
way
yeah.
to they're going to go, what is that? How do we even compile that data? So you're kind of doing small scale market research also as you launch this, which is kind of a cool thing too, because
Mm.
you'll know quickly like, oh, this person added it to the cart and didn't buy it. Do we need to lower our price, or were they just
Hmm.
curious? Did they just want to hold on to it? Like there's so much data that's got to be coming in since you dropped these out. It's really cool.
Thank
I
you.
keep saying
Yeah.
cool. I wish I could come up with another word, but it's so fun watching this go from concept to product. It really has
Right.
been.
Yeah, I think I think from if I was looking at it from an outside, I'd be super interested by it too because these are the stories that are always like super cool to me, and it's
Hmm.
cool to be like actually living it now because for years I've thought, man, I wish I had a cool product, or man, I wish I had something that fit me right, that I had the passion for it. Because all the things
Right.
I've made before, I'm like, I like it, it's cool,
It's
it's
cool.
different, but I'm like, now I need to just move on to the next thing. And this, I'm like, I really want to see this go down the road, and so I have enough passion to drive it, I think, and that's what it's super exciting to me. But it's also scary
Sure.
because, like you said, I'm sending these machines out to get beat up,
Hmm.
and there might be somebody out there who buys it. I mean, it's not a cheap product, right? Like
Right.
when you look at it next to other CNC machines, like you can see
It's a
that it's
yeah, it's comparatively inexpensive, but it's not cheap.
right, but it's still the price of a car. And,
Right.
especially just people are struggling in general with, we've had kind of a hard couple of years,
Sure.
of just from everything. Now, I'm not trying to take this into a political or anything like that, but like just pandemic, all this stuff, like people were
Sure.
struggling more than they were probably a few years ago. And it's just like, now I'm expecting them to spend enough money that they could spend on a vehicle, on a machine that is they have to learn from. Like there's hurdles there, right? There's
Yeah.
pricing of it, there's education of it, or the skill to get to that next level. But I think that there's enough there to entice people that like it. In my mind, like when I think of when I what I love about some small shops are people that have like multiple machines and they're just crushing it by like keeping all these different machines running. They seem to have like this lean manufacturing. Like I love seeing that.
Hmm.
And I think this is a way for people to do that is that like they already have their other CNC machine, or maybe this is their first one, but they get it and they can see that they can make, 3 or 4 handles a day. And but they can also be doing something with their hand tools while they're doing it. And
Right.
so it gives them a way to like make more money and also learn a new skill. Uh, that I think that there's enough there.
You're doing Odyssey CNC full time. You don't have a quote day job, so to speak. This is your day job, right? This is
Yeah, this is my day job, and I have a 3-year-old daughter who's my day job.
which is
She
which
takes up a
is
lot of
which
my
is your
time.
moonlighting as a father.
Exactly. Yeah, basically. Um, and it's great. I love having this time with her because, like I said
Mhm.
before, I was Navy for a few years, and I missed out on a lot of just family moments. So I get to enjoy like quality time sitting at home with her, you know, and that's when I get all my computer work done, and
Sure.
then she'll hang out with me, and then I'll be with now that I have like Brian out there in the shop too, I get so much more work done because I can
Right.
leave her and go out there. And my wife owns a cleaning company, so she's gotten to the point now where she just does the office work. Like for a long time, she was out there, doing all the cleanings herself, and she built up her company, and so she helps too. Now she's around the office, so whenever I go out to the shop, like I don't have to worry about what my 3-year-old's doing. Like I can go out there
Right.
for hours and not have to worry about it. So I'm kind of transitioning between it being full time with the woodworking while I'm also doing full time with my daughter, to being now I'm going full time into this company.
Mhm.
We're about to move into a bigger building because we're outgrowing the shop, and like we really want to scale this up, and I think it's going to be awesome.
Now, as you're ramping this up, as you're getting, close, you're going to be getting closer and closer continuously until launch. As you're getting closer and closer, are you finding it harder to balance work and life responsibilities, or do you have to sometimes catch yourself, at a point where you're like, "Oh, okay, I know I need to do this, but family needs to get some attention for a little while.
Hmm.
Like I need to back off just a little bit and let maybe let Brian handle something." Or
Hmm.
are you
Oh yeah.
finding that tough to balance? Because it's one thing to have a full-time business, it's another to have a full-time business that's going through a product launch. That's a very different animal from just having orders. So,
Right.
what's that been like for you?
So I don't think it's been tough. Like it's not it's better now than it was. It probably was a little tougher in the beginning, but I've been doing this for a while where it's always like, what's the next product? And I'll make a product and then be like I've said, I move on from it. And so
Mhm.
I've always had this like ebb and flow of like, okay, I don't feel like being in the shop. I'm going to do more stuff with family. But now with this, like my head has to be in it in all these different directions of
Right.
like, the website's got to be perfect. Like we got to figure out what the next plan is. We got to get like a good photographer, these machines, like not only all that stuff, but we have to like think of the next version of it and test it and like a bunch of different areas that like just a small shop to be trying to figure this out. Um, so but my mind's always wandered like that, right? Like I'm
Mhm.
always like it's hard to get me in the present, and I think lately I've been trying to be a lot better about that. Like
Okay.
just this whole year, just like I've been trying to figure that out, and I think I'm getting better about it, but we'll see. I
It's
don't know.
it's it's always gonna be it's always gonna be a process. It's
Hmm.
always gonna be a process trying to, you're basically, if your mind works anything like mine, which I'm getting the impression that it does, you will go until you hit a wall, and then you'll really wanna stop and think about that wall for a while. It's like, "Okay,
Hmm.
what do I have to do to get past this?" And you won't just, I mean, me personally, when I hit a wall like that, it's never, "I'm just gonna keep trying things till I'm through it." It's like, "No, I'm gonna come up with the perfect strategy." It's never the perfect strategy, but this is what goes
Right.
on in my mind. "I'm gonna come up with the perfect strategy. I'm gonna figure this out, and then we're gonna attempt it, and we're gonna be real careful about it." I could only imagine, like, when you have all this lined up behind it, like there's a lot invested, there's, there's sweat equity. You were just talking on the most recent episode of Makeshift, well, the most recent as we're recording this anyway, of the new building, and now that's an extra responsibility because you have to build that out, get your stuff in it, and start producing in that building. And it's kind of, I don't know, I'd be scared to death. I'm kind of impressed that you're just kind of taking it in stride the way you are.
So that comes with a lot of failure already.
Hmm.
Like this isn't my first big thing that I've tried to tackle. I talked about that
Okay.
on the last podcast also, was like most people don't know that I've already kind of been an entrepreneur trying to try different things. Like I talked about how we got into doing escape room stuff and doing like virtual reality stuff and like running down that road of trying to make a business out of that, and kind of falling flat on our faces there and being like losing a lot of money and
Hmm.
losing a lot of time. But then I look back at it and I'm like, I learned so much.
Yeah,
Like it never felt like it was the right thing to do, but it felt like it was too good of an opportunity not to do. Like it seemed
I
too
like that.
too fun to not do.
Right.
Like the thought of like having a virtual reality place and an escape room where I get to make all these cool things that work and people play with them, like it was too fun. But then whenever we just hit that wall of, well, it's hard to make money off this stuff, especially with the pandemic and all this crap going on. Like this needs to just it needs to just dissolve. And so we
Hmm.
did that and we moved on. And then I got back to my passion of trying to make a product and doing woodworking and learning more. And then it just evolved on its own to be the right thing. That I feel like everything, all my experience in my life so far has led to this. So I'm like, if I'm gonna fail on something, it might as well be something that I have enough passion to get me through it. You know, it may require a lot of money, investment, sweat equity, all that, but it's what I really want to be doing.
I also think it's kind of cool that, you are the poster boy in some ways for what the military does when they recruit people.
Mm,
It's like you're going to come, you're going to learn a skill, and you're going to, when you retire or when you leave, however you end up leaving. If you stay as a career, you stay as a career. But if you end up leaving, you're going to have a skill set that you can carry on into the real world.
mhm.
How much of your skill set was built in the Navy versus how much did you go in with? Because I know you said you were a machinist in the Navy. Did you go in with knowledge and then just refine it in the Navy, or did you learn it in the Navy and come out with the skills?
No, see, I learned it all in the Navy, and
Wow.
like
Okay, that's great.
a lot of people when they say that, like you ask them when they became a maker, and they're like, ah, when I was a kid and I was tinkering with things, and like
Hmm.
I tinkered with stuff when I was a kid, but I didn't consider myself a maker or that really led me to where I'm at. I did like sculptures in high school out of clay, but I don't
Hmm.
feel like that really has a whole lot to do with what I'm doing now. I had
Right.
no idea what machining was, except that when I went to the recruiter and he happened to be an engineer, which it's not engineers like what we think. It's like engineers in the Navy are all the rates that are kind of like the skilled trade. They put in the hard work, like make the ship run, fix stuff, weld things, like all that. So he was an engineman, so he worked on the engines, and he's like, if you're gonna get a trade in the Navy, if you're gonna do a job, you need to be a machinist because these guys work in the cool shop. They get to tear down metal. They make. He's like, I've seen a guy just take this thing that was like as small as a nut, and spin it down apart, and it was a bolt. And in my mind, I'm like, how the hell did he do that? Like, I had no idea.
That
Like,
sounds
now I
like
know.
wizardry, sir.
Yeah, now I know he just ran a die down, down something. But in my mind, I was like, what? And so I joined and did that, and we had like a 6 week crash course in machining. And
Hmm.
basically, for the first 2 weeks, they showed you videos of people getting ripped to pieces on a lathe. I'm like, this is bad. Don't stick your arm in here. And I'm like, I don't want to touch this machine. This is
Keep your
scary.
sleeves away from the spinning machines, sir.
Yeah. So the next 4 weeks was learn how to use a lathe and then learn how to use a mill. And so we
Hmm.
made a couple little projects, but then they're like, okay, go on your way, go out to the fleet. And for most of the people that go out to the fleet from then, like a lot of them go to ship by themselves or
Hmm.
might have one or two people, but those people might not have the experience to help them, you know,
Right,
because it's not like everybody gets trained perfectly on how to do this. So
right.
fortunately for me, is I went to like a submarine shop, repair shop in Virginia, and there was a ton of people there to help me. And every day they just sent me out to the lathe or the mill, and they said, "Make this." And so I had to. It wasn't like I just went to a ship and I was able to like skate by like pretending I knew how to do it. Like I had to do it. They made me, and they made me learn in my way. Like they made me learn. Like they gave me the book, the machinist book, and they said, "You need to make this. Here's your resource." And I'd come to them and I'd ask a question. And they'd be like, "Here's the book. Go read it. Go figure out how to make this." And I'm like, "Dude, why won't you just tell me?" And I was so frustrated about it. But looking back, it was like, oh, because when I did get to the ship and I was by myself, I had the book. I didn't have anybody to ask questions to.
Right.
I had to figure out how to make it. And that's gone through, now we have YouTube and all the stuff that we can find any information out. But that's one thing I push on my kids a lot is like my son will come up to me with like a math problem and he'll be
Hmm.
like, I don't know how, he's frustrated. I don't know how to do this. Can you just do it? And I'm like, no, you need to go back to the chapter, go back through what you needed to study on this,
Hmm.
and you need to figure out how to do this problem. He's like,
Sure.
just tell me how to do it. Just help me get through it. And I'm like, when you've gone back and you've looked and you've attempted it, then I'll help you work through the problem. But if you don't have the like fortitude to go back and do it all yourself, then you're just going to get stumped, throw your hands up and blame somebody else. Like you have to do that. And I think that was one of the best things I learned from the Navy, that and machining, because that's
You were
what got me on
basically
this road.
it was basically forced self-education.
Yes.
The one good thing about teaching about well, I say teaching, and I use that in the most light sense possible. But the one good thing about teaching you that way is, you learn on one sub, let's say, and the parts are
Mhm.
these are the specs for the parts on that sub, and you go to another sub, and it's a slightly different sub. Well, I don't need to know that this is how you make bolt 544. I just
Mhm.
need to know what's the spec for bolt 544 according to the book, and
Right.
I know how to interpret that into an object in the real world. I think that seems to make sense because I imagine you've probably bumped into needing similar skills as you've made your own parts for the Cyclones too. Like
Oh yeah, totally.
you've probably just had to figure it out, document whatever you've done, and then come back later and go, "Oh no, that's not good." But at least I have the document. I know what needs to change. I can redo it and then just remake the part. But
Right.
that's wild. I love that at first you think about that and it's like, wow, that's got to be rough, like trying to learn from just specs and being on the machine. But I guess in the real world, that's just the way it works. Like
Mhm.
someone hands you a book and says, here's the specs. You're the expert. Get to work.
Right, yeah.
How
Yeah, it's,
many? So they have I know they have a shop, but like, do you walk into a situation with that information? It's like, you're the guy. Like, that's it. This is your job. You have to get this done. There's not, you don't have like a ton of backup. It's like, no, they're relying on you to get this done
yep.
first. Like, you're
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy.
Yeah, I mean, there is the option of them sending it out,
Hmm.
but if you're in the middle of the ocean and the Red Sea or whatever, and
Sure.
you have a part that goes down, and it could be a part that keeps, like, just for instance, the part that I worked on was a fuel valve for like helicopters for flight operations, for them to send the helicopter out. That valve seized up, and the part that was in it, the bonnet, like was stripped of threads. So
Oh,
this is the
wow.
only valve that can fuel the helicopters, and they came to me, and I was the only one on the ship that was a machinist, and they're like, "Hey, we have to have this part." And I'm like, "Oh crap," because it was way more difficult of a part than anything I had made. Like it had
Mhm.
like these double lead Acme threads, like so it's way different than typical just threading like a V sharp.
Mhm.
And so like double leads is like you've got one lead going down, and then you have one staggered off to the side of it going down, so that
Mhm.
it spins quicker.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Through that. And so I'm like, man, I don't even know where to start on this. And it was a small like brass part, and I did it all basically on the lathe, but I needed to bore a hole, like drill a hole through it, and then use a tiny like internal boring tool that I had to make out of just tool steel, like grinding this thing to try to get it to work. And it wasn't rigid enough. Nothing I did could make these threads rigid because it would just chatter terribly as it was going through there. And I'm like, man, how am I going to figure this out? And I ended up making a tap that had the threads I needed on the lathe,
Ah,
and then
okay.
using the tap and forcing it through there, which luckily it was brass, so it didn't have to be like a super hard tap like tool steel. I was
Right.
able to make it out of steel and then harden it by just like heating it up and quenching it. And then I was able to get that part fixed. And for me, that I mean that is like the proudest moment when I look back of like what was the hardest thing you had to do that there was a ton of pressure on you. Like
Mhm.
I had to work like 20 hours straight to get this thing done because I was sweating bullets the whole time. Like, man, this is all on me. Like I don't want to let the ship down or like, look like an idiot who doesn't know what he's doing. And for the most part, nobody on the ship knew that it was that complicated. They're like, this is what he does. He should
It's
be
just
able
a
to do
simple thing. We hand it to the machinist, we get the
this.
part, like, this is what
Yeah.
we need.
Yeah.
Did you it amazes me how resourceful you end up having to be, like, it's not like they don't have you think if you think about it, it makes sense, but on first glance, you're like, "Oh, it's this big," it's maybe a carrier, and you're like, "Oh, they must have tons of parts in storage." Like, no, they travel pretty light as far as
Yeah. Right.
parts. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, no, if we need a part, we're gonna make a part. It's
Yeah.
that's what
Like
that's
if
what we got Corey for.
Right. Like, it would've been great if they had this tap already, because then that would've
Right.
been a 20-minute job maybe, like, maybe an hour job where I just turned down the part, put some external threads on it, and then ran a tap through it, and I'm done. But 16 of those hours was me sitting in a chair with a book, like, sweating and just being like, "I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing right now."
Where
And
do I
then
start?
every hour or two, somebody would come in and be like, "Where you at on this?" And I'm like, I'm figuring it out." You know what I mean? And they're like, "Well, we need this." Like,
Yeah.
we literally have to get these helicopters flying right now. And I'm like, like, I don't know.
Helicopter sitting on the deck, bro. Move it.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
crazy because you not only have to learn under pressure, you have to be super resourceful, but you have this. I mean, there's a certain amount of like, oh crap, this isn't just like a private company that needs a helicopter. This is the military. Like, this is
Mhm.
not a joke. This is probably one of the most high pressure, immediate need type functions you could possibly have is making parts for anything that the military is deploying. Like,
Right.
does the magnitude of that ever hit you where you go, "Wow, I can't believe I did that." Like, that's insane. Like, how did I do that?
I mean, it does, but then, it was so long ago that it's just one of
Mhm.
those things that happened, where it's like, yeah, just had to do it. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I gotcha. It's crazy because I don't think people understand how many different things people do on, when they're deployed. I think people think, everyone's either a soldier or a fighter pilot or a helicopter pilot or maybe a medic. They
right.
don't understand that, there's whole divisions of people that are just responsible for watching drones on a screen. There's a whole
Oh,
bunch of
yeah.
people that watch weather. Like
Yeah.
it's, those AWACS go up and they're going up to check out hurricanes and it's like, "Oh, okay, like
Yep.
that's cool." Like they're flying into hurricanes to take measurements and they're flying over oceans just to take measurements and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
amazing the breadth of skills that they can hire for now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, it was an awesome environment to be in, and, like, my heroes are the guys that are down in the engine spaces.
Mhm.
They're 110 degree spaces nonstop, and these guys don't see the light of day for 10 months probably. Like they might come up and go
Sure.
to the smoke deck or something like that, but they have 12-hour shifts down in the pit where they just have to go and monitor machines or like sometimes break down an engine and overhaul it, and the ship has to keep moving. Like they have
Yeah.
to keep going. So like those guys are who I'm like, man, if they didn't know what they were doing, like we'd be stuck. And
I
I, I think that's awesome.
It hit me so when I was younger, I was fully convinced after watching Top Gun 455,000 times
Yeah.
that I wanted to be in the Navy. I wanted to be a naval aviator.
Mm.
That was my career goal. I had all the documentation. I was a young kid. I was probably, I don't know, 12, 13, and there was a recruiting office around the corner from me, and I went into the recruiting office and I told him what I wanted to do, and he goes, "Son, you're a bit young for that." I was like, "No, I know, but I know this is what I want to do." So he gave me a whole bunch. He gave me like a whole bunch of Navy stuff, and
Mm.
he gave me this really cool magnet that I still remember. He's like, "When you're ready, you come back and we'll bring you on board." I'm like, "All right, this is awesome."
Nice.
And so that summer, both my grandfathers were in the Army. My grandfather was in the one grandfather was in the Army Air Force, and my other grandfather was a drill sergeant in the U.S. Army.
Mm.
So, military's kind of in my blood. And I was like, no, I'm definitely doing this Navy thing. So my father's like, well, I don't love the idea of you joining the Navy. He goes, but what we can do, he goes, why don't, you know what? It would be really cool as a day trip for the summer. They took me to the Intrepid.
Oh, nice.
And what struck me, like I had no concept of what, a real ship was like. The first thing that hits you is it's gigantic. And that's not even a big ship by modern standards. They show a model inside the Intrepid of it compared to the Enterprise, which is not even a modern ship at this point. It's,
Oh, no,
you
it's
know,
not.
they're 40 years old. And it's like it can fit on the deck and have plenty of room left over. Like it's just tiny comparatively. But the one thing that caught me as I was wandering around, because they give you a tour, and
Mm.
you're going up and down the steps, you go into the tower and you go into the, where the quarters are, and everything is so damn claustrophobic. Like
Mm.
you don't
Oh, yeah.
realize it, like as someone who's never been on a ship, it's everything's tight. So I'm imagining when you talk about the guys in the engine room, 110 degrees, and you're not in like a spacious place. You're in like a really confined place. It's
Mhm.
probably dark, it's probably steamy, it's definitely dirty. It's
Mhm.
like that's got to be just ooh, you're right. I have a lot of respect for those guys.
Yeah, I liked being in my shop because, it was confined, but, like, I had air conditioning for the most
Mhm,
part, like, it was nice to be able to, like, just hide away in there and make what I wanted to make, but there are spaces and just tight spots on there where you sometimes have to, like, go down and, like, work on a valve or something, and it's, like, pinched between
mhm,
the bulkhead and, like, way up here and, like, on top of pipes and, like, there's no room to work.
mhm.
And then you go on a submarine and you're like, "Oh, I had all the room in the world because they literally cram everything into every cubic inch of a sub.
Yeah.
It's insane being in there."
I love one of my favorite things that you and Chris do, because you and Chris were together for a certain period of time, I'm assuming, or
Yes. So
your service didn't just overlap, you actually served together.
yeah. So we were on the same ship and I think it was the only ship he was on, and it was my first ship. So being a
Mhm,
machinist, they moved me around a lot.
mhm,
And Chris was a welder. So we did work directly together a lot because we were in the same division. So we, had quarters in the morning, and we actually it's funny because we were like direct competition. Like he was the guy in my division that was always working on his qualifications, working on the next thing. That we were the same rank, and every time it came up to an evaluation, it was me and Chris against each other. But we always had a ton of respect for each other because we knew
mhm,
what the other person had to do. That we always had like a friendly competition in a way.
mhm,
And so yeah, that was great. And then the funny thing about that and how like the makeshift podcast came together and all that was like we had both found the maker community separately.
mhm,
Over almost over 10 years later from like we didn't really talk to each other. I think we were Facebook friends, but I was seeing that he was putting out YouTube videos and that he was like liking some of the same posts I was liking, and this is before I really even knew I was in the maker community. I just was a dude on Instagram that happened to like these other woodworkers, and then we started talking again, and became friends again, and then it just kept going until we were like, you know what, we should do our own podcast, and we're like, okay,
sure.
let's do it.
Let's do
So
it.
yeah.
Hey, the more in the space, the better. That you guys, I remember saying right after you guys got started. I don't know if I said it to you or I said it to Chris or if I said it on Because We Make the weekend you launched. But I
Mm,
remember saying that the vibe between you two was the kind of vibe that you develop with your co-host over weeks and weeks and weeks, and you guys just
mm,
kind of came right out of the gun, like instantly. Like you had this cool chemistry. You kind of there was no awkward silences between you. You had this nice flow with the podcast, and I think it's been kind of cool watching the show evolve but not change. Like,
Mm.
you guys are you're smoother in your presentation now. The nerves seem to have kind of gone away. You've kind of really settled into what the show is, and you're not trying to do something that everyone else does. It's just you and him having a chat. Sometimes there's a guest involved.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we want to do is keep it real down to earth and easy for anybody who
Mhm.
comes on the show. Is like you're just hanging out with friends.
Yep.
And it was funny when we were putting it together. We're like, I mean, we were both in the Navy. We're gonna have Navy stories, but who in the maker community really wants to hear Navy talk? And we're like, we should just like not do it. And then we're like, well, it's part of our past though. Like we have a
Sure.
lot of stories from this. And we're like, we'll just sprinkle in a story every once in a while, but not make the show about the Navy because you don't
Right.
want to go hear about it every week when you weren't in the military and you don't want to hear that crap. Like, so we
Mhm.
just try to keep it more maker central. But hey, we were also in the military, and this is a lot of our background and how we approach things now is like just our attitude, I guess, is from that.
Yeah. I think if you were going to do a weekly segment of any kind that you really should stick to, you really do need to have a Perkins story of the week.
I
Like,
know.
I just this guy, I hope to God he never finds your podcast. Like, I really do. Like, and it's not that you're nasty. It's just like, oh my God, can you imagine just having your
Oh
moments
yeah.
just exposed out there for everyone to see? Like,
Right.
this poor guy, he was just, I don't know, he was just hapless. I guess that's the word for it. Just a hapless kind of schlubby guy.
Yeah, he's just very unique, and we talked about that, and we're like, man, we don't want it to be like bullying, like we're just pushing
Hmm.
this guy around. But he was such an interesting character that we have to bring up the stories. Like if you would have worked with this, everybody's got that coworker that they're like,
Sure.
man, where did this guy come from? Like, how do you get to this level of being like just this quirky or whatever it is that you can have all these stories? But he just was so. I mean, if somebody told me now that he was the first functional robot that looked like a human being, I would believe you. I would be like, that explains everything. If he's the first attempt at AI, it would make sense because
He
he'd
was
literally like be in quarters and he'd just turn around and face the wall and like be shouting something, and we're like he was just malfunctioning, and we're like,
he
what
was
is going
malfunctioning.
the story on the ship was like this guy was undercover. Like he
Hmm.
was just messing with us. Like, and we're like, this is the best actor in the world. Like he'd be getting like golden, I don't know, whatever all the Oscars or whatever are. I'm like, he's got to have a reality TV show we're not aware of because how can you be this way? But the only problem with the Perkins stories is that we can't remember all of them. Is like we want to have more of them, but we're like reaching out to people like, you guys got any good stories? Like we want it to be more of a segment, but can't remember everything.
Probably, and it's a combination of not being able to remember, or there just being so many that they just in the moment they were just blurring together. It's like, wait, that's today's story. All right, what's going
Right.
to be tomorrow's story now?
Yeah.
So, what do you think? I mean, obviously the Cyclone launch is going to be your focus for a while, and then when do you expect to start putting these out in quantity? Like, are you looking at middle next year, end of next year? How long do you think you're going to run the beta for? Or does it just depend on what the feedback looks like and if there's any showstoppers before you go live?
Yeah, I think that is the big thing there is like I'd love to be able to say like, oh yeah, production will be, you know, February or something like that. Like that would be a
Hmm.
good target goal for me of being like beginning of the year, you know, the holidays are tough anyway to be buying a big purchase,
Of
but
course.
after the holidays and Christmas bonuses and your taxes, like maybe people are more willing to spend spend some money on a new purchase.
Hmm.
Then and I'd love to be ready for it then, but it all depends on how this test goes. Like if we have issues and we have to completely overhaul this thing and send people like what if the motors aren't up to par? You know
Mm.
what I mean? Like and we have to send everybody new motors. Like that's a lot of money that we have to eat because I'm not going to tell the people that are beta testing that you have to pay for that. I'm just going to be like, this is what'll fix it. And we'll get that. It could be any number of things. It could be the controller that we think is great that worked perfectly for us could have a flaw in one of five of them that we're buying or something like that. And that's not going to be good enough for actually sending out to market. So
Well,
it's things like this we have to figure out.
I was going to actually ask you a question that I'm not trying to get you to poke a hole in your own product, but I was just curious if there's anything when you send these out that you go, Okay, we took a bit of a risk in that design. Is that like, are there any risks that you took that you pretty sure are good risks, but that you're a little bit like, this is what I hope people can test and I hope works out okay? You don't have to be specific, but is
Mhm.
there anything that when you put the machines together, you went, okay, this is, you have maybe multiple designs and you went with one and you're hoping that this was the right one. Is there anything you're kind of rooting for or?
No, I think everything is like we made it solid, right?
Mhm.
And I think that it's a super solid design. The one thing that I am questioning though is like extrusion versus like linear tubes. You know what I mean? Because I
Mm,
have extrusion with linear rails on them, and then I see like Onefinity, and they have like lower prices, and they have it's a very solid looking machine, and I'm like, man, maybe I should have done something like that. Maybe we should have
right,
went a different route on that, and that's something we're going to explore. But I think a lot of that is they're a much bigger company. They can
right,
buy things in bulk, they can get their price down, and we're not going to be able to get to that point. Like we're trying to keep this as low as we can without shooting ourselves in the foot
right,
because we are starting from nothing. I can't afford to make, you know, $200 on a machine because I can't afford to output that many for it to add up. You know,
right.
I've got to pay Brian and I've got to pay the bills, and I don't even expect to be taking a check from this for the foreseeable future. Like as long as I can get by,
Mhm.
like I'm fortunate enough that I'm in the situation that my, you know, we bought our house uh 8 years ago, have it almost paid off. We keep our bills low. Like we don't need much to get by.
Right.
And so I'm more worried about just everything else.
Okay.
And if I don't, you know what I mean? Eventually we'll be able to hit some of those goals, I think, but right now we've got to just like put our best foot forward.
Yep. I think you're well on your way. I really do. I like your philosophy with the machine. I like the way you're approaching it. I like how you're getting your ducks in a row, getting the machine into the hands of more people than just your close friends. It's just like, nope, if you want to be the one to test this, take it. And you don't know who's going to buy it. You might get it in the
Exactly.
hands of a complete crazy person and they're
Mhm.
just going to rip it apart and that would be the dream because
Yeah, I
those are
know.
the people that are going to give you the best feedback.
Yeah, we
No.
were actually talking about this the other day, just me and Brian, and it was one of the guys that wants to buy the machine is local to us, but he so far has been a major pain in the butt. I
Mhm.
hope he doesn't listen to this, but he's just very particular. Like
Right.
he's doing his own thing right now, and he needs absolutely zero run out on the spindle and stuff like that. Like he needs
Going to happen at
a lot of
on this
woodworkers.
caliber of machine. It's just
Yeah,
that's the $10,000 to $100,000 machines that you were talking about earlier.
yeah,
Zero
yeah,
run out
yeah.
is not realistic. It's
I
just
know, but what I was telling him was like, this is good for us though, because he's local.
right.
We can go address any problems he has, and we can really hone this thing in to be as precise as possible. And if
You
we
can
can please
refine it.
that guy, we can please the hobbyists that, you know, already like the handles that I'm making, the handles I made on the very first machine. I was so surprised they came out as nice looking as they did, because it's
Okay.
like surely this thing being a hobbyist grade machine running on V wheels, and like it didn't have pulleys, but it just had lead screws that, you know, you can see the slop in it when it the backlash and all that. And I'm like, man, this is not gonna. It sounded terrible too. Like when the X motor just wasn't either calibrated right or the nuts weren't right, and it just we had to only run it in the rotation because every time it would move down the X, it just sounded awful. And I'm like, gosh. But then we were getting parts off this thing, and I'm like, this is beautiful. And like we took a bunch of stuff to the maker camp, and everybody that saw it was like, what? How did you make this? This is the coolest thing I've seen. And I'm like we made Chuck Norris's face that was a half an inch tall and a half an inch wide, and it had awesome detail. And I'm like, how are we able to do this on version 1? Like what are we
Yeah.
going to be able to make on version 5, you know? So
And
I'm
that's got
excited.
to be the cool part. Like now it's not going to be major it's probably not going to be major redesigns. It's going to be refinement as you move further down the process now.
Mm,
So that's great. I'm so happy for you. I'm so glad that it's working out. I'm so glad that you're about to bring it to market or at least get
mhm.
it in the hands of some people. It's been really cool to watch and I wish you all the best on it, man. I'm really happy for you. I
Thank
can't
you.
do it, so I'm just going to have to be happy for you doing it.
Thank you. Well, the thing is, there is like I couldn't do it if I didn't have a supportive community. Like not at all.
Mhm.
Like I, who am I going to reach that wants to buy this machine if I didn't have a community that was willing to listen to me talk about it or watch my posts or share my posts. Like I
Hmm.
this will only work if the community supports it, and that's my biggest thing is like I want people to love it, not say, oh, it's like so and so CNC company that they're out of some country across the world and they don't care about getting back to us with emails or sending us repair parts. Like they make enough money off everybody. Like we want to be easy to approach, I think
Good.
is the thing.
I
So
think I think that's a good goal to have. I think, like I said, I think you're well on your way to it. And you and Chris being as active as you are in the community and having a podcast where you expose other makers, it endears you to the maker community,
mhm.
and that usually finds a way to get a payback out of it. Like, it
Mhm.
may not be immediate, but people in this community do support other people in this community. It's pretty remarkable how supportive everybody is of everybody else, even if they're quote competing with each other. So
Right.
it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to it. Let's switch over to things of the week. What
Okay.
did you bring to the table this week?
So my thing of the week is going to be Kyle Eli. I think I'm saying his last name right. It's Ely. So it's either Eli or Ely, but I think it's Eli.
Okay.
Kyle Eli from Learn Your CNC. And this dude, like he bought the first Cyclone as soon as it dropped. He
Oh
didn't
wow.
like message me and say like, "Hey, I'm gonna be able to like promote this. Can I get a discount?" Like he was like, "I got you. I'm getting this thing," and is super excited about it. And I'm not only just sharing it because of that, but he has had this awesome training program for Vectric. And that's actually how I found out about him. It was like when I was trying to figure out this rotary stuff, it was like, I can't just do this with YouTube videos. Like, I need a program that I can go step by step. And this dude has, through Learn Your CNC, he goes from, if you don't know anything about anything, like you've never even used Inkscape or Illustrator, like he goes through all of this is how you use Vectric from the start, and he goes through all of your just what a vector is, like how to do anything like that, two-dimensionally to three dimensions to all of the modeling, and then gets into rotary. So he's got the complete package for if you want to learn how to use Aspire, he's got it for you, or Vectric in general. But that's how I found the dude, because his videos were just like on point. He's got an awesome way of delivering all the information, and he's almost got check marks of how you can go back to stuff. It's all like
Great.
cataloged on, like, if you need to, oh, I need to brush up on how to use vectors. Like there's a chapter for that. Like it's so easy to just thumb back through it. Rewatches. All the videos are short too. Like 5 to 20 minute videos on how to do each step of this thing. And I'm like, this guy has got something figured out here that is super great.
That
And he's
is
super supportive.
I'm looking at the website now. He has so much
Oh yeah.
reference material on his site. Like,
Hmm.
this is incredible. I wish when I was trying to learn VCarve that
Hmm.
I knew about this guy, because VCarve ended up being, for me, I just couldn't figure it out for nothing. I
Hmm.
couldn't get it to actually produce us to produce a simulation that looked like it was going to work. Like, I just couldn't. I don't know. I feel like the only thing I've ever understood is Fusion 360 and Carbide Create. But
Hmm.
seeing this is like, oh, maybe you could understand it if you had this guy helping out. So
Oh right. And that's how I did it too, because it was the same way. It was like, great, I've been doing Fusion for years, and now I have to get a new software because
mhm.
Fusion will do rotary, but you have to
for
pay
a,
six.
for a price.
You have to pay $1,600 to get the machining add-on of the
Mhm.
multi-axis, and not everybody can do that. So why would I
Yeah.
do all of my training and say you also have to pay this? Which you could argue that with Vectric you still have to buy into it, but a lot of people that are woodworkers and CNC are already using VCarve.
Yep.
They might, to get into modeling your own things, you might have to upgrade to Aspire.
Hmm.
But for the most part, it'll do all the tool paths. And
Yep.
then you can, like, if you had a handle that was already 3D modeled or something from Thingiverse, you can bring it in and make small edits, like a
Totally.
logo, things like that to put on it. And so it was a no brainer for me of I have to learn at least Vectric and Aspire to teach it to people. And eventually I will pay for that machining add-on to Fusion and I want to show Fusion and Vectric. Like you could use either one. Here's some
Sure.
videos on that.
Yeah, you almost
Uh,
have to. I mean,
Yeah.
just in case. Like that is an expensive add-on. I mean, it kills me that I pay $500 a year for Fusion, but
Mhm.
it's just for me. I just look at it as a cost of doing business. I have to use Fusion. Like I
Right.
have to have at least have access to it. So it's like okay,
Mhm.
fine, and it's useful enough when I need it. So it
Right.
just
I could swap to Aspire full time now because it does do everything Fusion does.
sure.
But I love Fusion. I love having that just the nice graphics is just like it's weird. It's like going to a 1080p TV and then going back to like a 720 or something, and you're like, this is awful. You know what I
I
mean?
feel
Like,
like I feel like VCarve and Aspire were designed for Windows 7 and then they
mhm,
never went beyond with the and I know that that's, I have to think of it differently. I have to think of it in terms of, these are people machinists are using this. So if
yeah,
they used it on a Windows 7 machine and you completely revamp the interface on it, there's going to be hewing and crying all over the
yeah,
place about it. You can't really just change it up after a while. So,
yeah. I have my arguments back and forth about it because it's like Fusion, you can do more with it. You can have better tool paths because you can actually edit everything. Every
mhm.
part of the tool paths you can change to where you can
Yep.
get the exact way you want to cut something. And with
Mhm.
Vectric, you can't. Some things you can change to have like your start point, but you're limited by the software. But for most people, they don't need to be able to. They're not using $100,000 CNC machine that they have to approach it with
Basically.
the, this through coolant in mill that has to cut in a certain way. You know what I mean? Like
I'd
they're
more
just
likely believe that most people are like me using a hobbyist level or, even a prosumer level machine.
mhm,
They're not using high end machines. I mean, I'm sure there are people that are doing that, but I think the majority, that sweet spot is in like where I am with a $2,500 CNC.
yeah,
That's what they're using. It's going
mhm,
here and it has to kind of work for those people primarily
exactly.
because that's the largest market segment that you sell your product to. So,
Yeah, exactly. My downside with Fusion on the opposite of Aspire is like sometimes I'll put a model in there and it just craps its pants and it won't load for an hour
yeah.
and I'm like, you're doing too much, Fusion.
Does not like
Give us a hobbyist level of this.
does not like dealing with a lot of triangles, and
Yep.
STLs are just tons of triangles.
Hmm.
But also what I've found over the years is that a lot of models are solid. And when models are solid instead of just a shell, those internal triangles that you can't even see, well, Fusion's still trying to calculate them
Oh yeah.
until it just craps out. It's like, you hit there is a limit to how many millions of triangles it can process,
Hmm.
and that's why it ends up making you go into the mesh mode to try to do
Yeah.
anything with it.
Exactly. And it's
One of
trying
the
to figure out like the material density and where it's going to fail. And you're like, okay, I know why you're doing that for big engineers and people that need that, but I don't. I'm a woodworker. Like,
You're like
chill out.
he's like the overeager apprentice who like you ask for him to type a form letter and he spends 2 hours agonizing over the font. It's like, "Bro, I appreciate your attention to detail here, but
Exactly.
it's really not that important for me right now. Can we just get the file?"
Right.
That's why I think it's important to also have a wide tool belt, so to speak. So like
Mhm.
I'm competent, barely functional in like Blender or
Mm.
something like that. Like I remember the old days of Mesh Mixer.
Oh yeah.
I miss that because that was great. You just bring it in, hit reduce triangles. It was like one
Exactly.
menu function. And it's like all of a
Yeah.
sudden Fusion doesn't crap its pants when you bring it in. So
Right.
the good old days.
Yeah, I know.
But I will have the link for it's learnyourcnc.com. I will definitely have that link in the show notes because I have a feeling a lot of people that listen to this podcast are probably going to be super interested in that.
Good.
Um, going from the amazing digital fab and some actual knowledge to a guy who does some incredibly cool stuff. Back on the Because We Make days, I had Steve Giordano, whose YouTube channel is Dashner Designs, and he does furniture restos.
Oh, okay.
And I really, really love watching furniture restos. I don't know why. I'm never going to do it, but I love watching it. I love people who are really good at it because you don't just learn about furniture restoration, you also learn about, principles, solid principles of construction, woodworking, finishing, like trying to match finishes, which is something that every woodworker struggles with. I don't care who you are,
Mhm.
you always
Oh yeah.
struggle with it. You never get it right on the first try. So this guy does some really cool stuff, and he just recently, I think it was either this weekend or yesterday, dropped a new video, and the title is beat up coffee table gets a modern makeover with laser, which doesn't sound terribly interesting until you look at what he actually did with this table. This table was beat to hell, and he took it and he scalloped with a angle grinder all the way around, then did mahogany stain, and then used a low end diode laser to
Mm,
carve these cool inserts for the top of it, and it just came out so beautiful. And I think this guy's channel just needs some more people to subscribe. I know he's got 76,000. He's not like hurting for subscribers, but he's one of those channels that I just love watching his videos. I don't miss one. So
right.
definitely check this video.
You sent me the table he was working on, some screenshots of it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
amazing how he went from what it was, which I would probably throw that in my fire pit,
Uh-huh.
honestly, if we're on the curb, and made this amazing piece that you could see being, I don't know, thousands of dollars of an amazing coffee table that somebody would
Right.
keep forever. And
Doesn't it look like a West Elm piece? Like I immediately got West Elm vibes from it. Like it looks
mhm.
like a West Elm piece, like one that they would have in the middle with a price tag of, $2,500 on
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah, for sure. What is his account again, so I can actually
His
follow him right
account
now?
is that's a okay, there you go. Thank you for prompting me, podcast guest. I appreciate that because I'm an idiot and I don't know how to do this. The YouTube channel is Flipping Drawers.
Okay.
FLIPPINGDRAWERS. Thank you for reminding me to actually say the
Oh
name
yeah.
of the channel. I'm all about the video title, but yeah, this guy is great.
Oh,
He
cool. He
does
has a Instagram too. That's what I was looking for.
Yep. Oh, I didn't even know. That's good. I didn't even know he had an Instagram. That's probably where I'll end up following him again because I pretty much, if you don't exist on Instagram, you don't exist in my world anymore. So sad that we've gotten to that point. But yeah, this guy does some really, really incredible stuff. He's worked with materials in such interesting ways and turning stuff that should have been, well, that was thrown away into stuff
Mhm.
that's just like keepsakes. It's
Oh yeah.
wild.
Yeah, it's
So,
some pretty amazing stuff, and I love those stories too. Like we just had Bryce on the Waffle Beaver, and
mhm.
I love his philosophy of let's save the trash, kind of in a way of
Yeah.
like. And a lot of people have this approach, but it's so cool to see people like that who just take something and save it and say, no, we don't need to throw it away. Like let's just
Yeah.
find a way to reuse it. Super
a
cool.
lot of a lot of this, I'm starting to see more and more where people will do these restos and they don't even keep them. They just take them to like Goodwill or, Salvation Army or, Habitat for Humanity and let them sell them. I don't care.
Right,
They want this to not be waste.
right.
And it's like, wow, what a great way to look at things. I
Yeah, that's
love that.
super cool. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think
yeah,
it's
and it is something we're capable of doing.
mhm.
We are capable. If you want to keep stuff out of the waste stream, well, open up your workshop and start taking things out of the waste stream. Like, there you go. You can
Yeah.
make that happen.
It's
So,
very interesting to see where like just people's heads are like this day and age of like in the 1950s they didn't have the option to just throw something out, like they had to
mhm,
figure out how to fix it. And
yeah,
I think that we've gone through like the phases of making things more disposable, and now it's like coming back around that people are like, wait, let's not just
mhm,
throw everything away. There's
yeah,
obviously a problem with that. Let's get back to fixing our own stuff. And that's a huge part of the maker community. Like there's just a giant community just on repairing and fixing things. That's
yeah.
awesome.
I love that it's permeating everything. Like, you see people getting more involved in like, hey, why is my car engine have a black cover over it so that I can't get to any of the parts?
You're right.
Or
Yeah.
why does my John Deere tractor have a copyright and a license and a special screw that I can't get off it? And why can't I
Mhm.
fix my tractor? Or,
Exactly.
all these things that people are doing now, all these electronics. I watch probably way too many electronics fixing channels where people are like, fixing stuff that would just end up as e-waste.
Mhm.
And it's, a lot of times it's maybe 2 or 3 hours of work. And all of a sudden, this piece of e-waste that would have just ended up in a landfill somewhere is now usable again. And somebody can, like, I'm talking like Nintendo Switches, new
Oh, right.
Xboxes. We're not even talking like old stuff.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
talking new stuff that people would just go, this doesn't work anymore. Chuck it in the bin.
Mhm.
Not doing
Yeah,
that anymore.
it's kind of unfortunate that like the manufacturers are more on board with like, no, we need to fix it. And I could see where that's coming from of like, it's our specialty, you're going to mess it up. But then they have like, 15-year-old cars that you still can't get in and
Hmm.
drain the transmission oil yourself because they have a
Yeah.
specialty tool that you can
Hmm.
only take it to the dealer to do. And then you take it to the dealer and they're like, it's over 10 years old. We don't do this anymore. And like,
Yeah.
okay, well, how do I do it? Why did they make it impossible?
it's like when you get a vehicle now and you find out like, oh, I think it needs some transmission fluid or it's like, yeah, it's a sealed system.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. Yeah.
What? Like
Yeah.
what? It's
How do
what?
I just repair my own
Mm,
car that I spent money
like
on?
yeah, I mean that would be like buying a car and they weld the gas tank shut. And it's like I need gas and it's like no, it's a sealed system. You
Yeah.
can't put gas in
You
it.
got to come back to our gas station only. Like, what?
Exactly. We'll drill a hole, put gas in it, and then weld it shut again. So maybe we'll get Cory. Maybe we'll get Cory to design a specialty cap. Just give him the book and let him do it.
Right.
um, we do have some financial supporters that we need. I keep saying we. I'm so in the habit. I've had a co-host for so long. I
Oh,
have to
right.
start saying I. But this show, let's do it that way. This show does have some financial supporters that I need to give a quick shout out to. And those are the people that subscribe to the show via my website. And I really appreciate all of them. And those people include Matthew Serio of Artigiano Serio, Al Schultz of New York Woodworks, Tori Decker of Tori Did It, Ed Swanson of Ed's Clocks and More, Jake Drews of Make with Jake, Megan Chris from Onyx Designs Woodwork, Christian Neary of Warren Works, Jeff Stein, aka A Weird Guy, Kim and Garrett from Kim and Garrett Make It, Rory Langefeld of RLL Woodworks and DIY, Robert J. Keller, Rebecca Cole of Bexy Designs, Brian Arsenault of Seven Hills Maker, Lars Coleman of Colorado Multicraft, Dave Bauer of Dave Bauer Art, Jeremy Spees, Mike of Pixels to Prototype, and Don LeBlanc of Fun with Woodworking. All those people support this show financially, and I greatly appreciate all of it. If you can't support the show financially, that's fine as well. Feel free to leave a review, share the show, turn someone onto it that may not have heard it already, because the more listeners we get, the more reviews that we get, the more people start listening, and maybe we'll get supporters that way. But I appreciate every level of support that we get, including the shares, the love, the financial support, whatever it is. It's always appreciated. I can't do this show without you guys supporting it. And I appreciate that so many of you do. And I really, really am grateful for it. Cory, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. And just for those of you that don't know, because of course you don't know, because I didn't tell you, but I asked Cory literally yesterday, I'm like, hey, you doing anything tomorrow? You want to record? He's like, okay. It's like, cool. Like that was it. That was the big planning sesh that went on for this episode. But
Yeah.
I'm
No, it
really
was
glad I
awesome.
finally got to talk to you. I've known Chris forever, and it was like when I saw you guys were spinning up a podcast, I'm like, okay, so now that Cory's got some mic time behind him, I'm going to have to get him on the show one day. And it's like, well, you know what? One day is now, since you really do fit the quote. I say focus with the most biggest, like, whatever quotes I could possibly say it with, because, but I do appreciate you coming on. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with the Cyclone, and I hope it's a super big success for you. And then one day you'll be advertising on this podcast because you'll be a millionaire and you'll be helping out all your poor podcasting friends.
I hope so. That'd be great.
That would be great.
But yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a blast, and it was pretty funny about like, hey, when can you come on? And I'm expecting like I have you down for 4 months later because you know you're better at this than we are. Like we do, or like, hey, what are you guys doing tomorrow? Like, come on the show. And when you're like, you available tomorrow? I was like, oh, I got to make that work. Like, I
Oh
want to
yeah.
come on the show. Yeah, it's so
Oh,
awesome. Thank you.
it's so great. It's so great to have you on. And what's funny is, without having a co-host now, it's very easy for me to schedule. So it's like, oh no, I can schedule someone like middle of the day if I'm not working that day,
All
or
right.
like I don't have to think like, oh, I have to get I have to wrangle a co-host anymore. Like it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
nope, I want to record today, and if the guest is available, that's when we're recording. So it's kind of weird. People watching this are noticing that the windows, there's sunlight coming in the windows behind me in my apartment. So,
Yeah.
but
It
thank
is
you so
weird
much for
because
coming on.
yeah. Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
good luck with Makeshift. I'm really happy. I'm really happy to call myself a Patreon
Hmm.
of the Makeshift podcast. I wasn't one of the first. I'm no Keith Drennan, but I like to think that I was in there in the first 5, which is good enough for me. So
Yeah, we'll say that. But yeah, we love the support. I'm so glad you're in there because Vincent's actually in our top tier. That's in our group chat, and that's the
mhm.
best thing ever. Like we're just always chatting away in there, and it's awesome. You get to
We're the
actually
only
know people.
podcast in history that did this on the Instagram chats, and it's so good that it's not even annoying that it's there. So it's not a Discord, it's the Instagram chat. And it's like, no, this is fun, man. The conversations are, I'll tell you what, that's a reason to just get in that tier, to get in that conversation, because there is some funny stuff that goes through that room. Like, I don't jump in a lot, but I really enjoy. Like I read it all the time. I'm just laughing and laughing. Just some funny people in that chat. So,
Yeah.
Cory, where can people find you in case they want to follow along with your journey to wealth, stardom, and fame?
Or a giant failure. That could be, that's a good lesson though. You know what I
Hey,
mean?
you only learn
Still
from your
follow that.
you
Yeah.
only learn from your failures. So that's what I've been
Um,
told anyway.
right. So I am most present on Instagram at Odyssey underscore CNC.
Hmm.
Um, we've started doing some YouTube stuff, and it's the same name, and we're going to get a lot heavier on there. And then Facebook is kind of a mirror of Instagram. Whenever I think to put it over there, like
Okay.
it's a lot less followers, and eventually, at some point, I'm like, oh man, I haven't posted to Facebook in a month, so it's great.
Great. So I will have all of Cory's links in the show notes so that you can follow along and keep up with the developments on the Cyclone. And if you want one, um, I mean, I don't know if you're going to have it when we drop this, but you still have machines available or?
Yeah, I have 3 available for the beta test now.
Okay.
So
So we'll
yeah,
see what happens. We'll see what happens when this drops. But if they do, you can find them on his website, which of course I will also link in the show
okay.
notes below for this episode. So thanks for listening, everybody. I will be back again next week with a guest, and I hope you have a great week. And thanks for listening. We'll see you then.